President Abraham Lincoln looked tired and careworn as he stepped up to give his second inaugural address on March 4, 1865. The country had been embroiled in civil war for nearly 4 years, and the conflict had taken its toll on the president. He hadn't even been sure that he would win re-election, for the war had been going badly for the Union throughout the election year of 1864. Only the Union captures of Mobile, Alabama, and Atlanta, Georgia had given citizens enough faith to commit to Lincoln for another 4 years. Lincoln's second inaugural address was short, only 701 words, and between 6 and 7 minutes long, but it was a powerful message to a country weary of war. In it, the president answered 3 questions that were weighing on the minds of his listeners. What is the war really about? When will the war end? And what should happen after the war? Lincoln was meditative in this speech, and one wonders if somehow he had an inkling that in only a little over a month he would be killed by an assassin. According to Lincoln, the Civil War was about slavery. Slavery caused the war, he maintained, and that should be evident to everybody. 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it, the president reminded his audience. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. To strengthen, perpetuate, and extend this interest was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union even by war, while the government claimed no right to do more than to restrict the territorial enlargement of it. The South wanted to expand slavery. Many in the North wanted to abolish slavery or at least prevent it from spreading into the Western territories. The North was not, however, completely innocent, Lincoln asserted. It had plenty of interest in slavery, too, because it made a healthy profit off of slave-grown cotton, and Northerners were often just as racist as Southerners. Slavery was a national sin, the president told his hearers, and the war was a consequence of that sin. Lincoln went on to say that he prayed that the war would end soon. He, like most other Americans, was horrified by the high cost of the war, especially the cost of soldiers' lives. The president believed, however, that the war would only end when the nation had paid the full price of the sin of slavery. God would determine when that debt was canceled, and no one knew his will. The president personally thought that the horrors of war would continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. Slavery, which was maintained by violence, would only die by violence. Perhaps, however, the time was near for the war to end. The North had won some major victories over the past few months, and the South was weakening in resources and manpower. Lincoln was already looking ahead to the day when he could put the country back together, and his goal was to get back to normal as quickly, easily, and compassionately as possible. The president wasn't out for revenge against the South. He didn't want to punish Southerners. In fact, his plan for Reconstruction included an easy readmission to the Union, pardons for any Confederates willing to take an oath of loyalty, and the full restoration of rights and property, except for slaves, to the South. This is why Lincoln ended his second inaugural address with the following plea: with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Initially, Lincoln's address wasn't very popular. His listeners were certainly moved emotionally, some of them even to tears, but many didn't care for the president's message. They didn't like being told that they shared in the guilt of slavery. They didn't appreciate being reminded that no one knew when the war would end. They certainly didn't care for Lincoln's easy plan of Reconstruction. They would rather the president take a harsher approach to their enemy's reinstatement to the Union. They wanted revenge. After Lincoln was assassinated in April, however, public perception of his speech changed. Copies multiplied and spread throughout the nation in tribute to the fallen president. Politically, however, his ideas about reuniting the country mostly fell on deaf ears. Reconstruction without Lincoln would be a long, painful process. Abraham